Hi, I'm Professor Green, and today we're going to be doing Chapter 3, Part 1. It's a long part of the chapter. So let me go ahead and start my screen. It will take a few minutes here. I expect this video to be about 30 minutes at least. And so as I was saying, Chapter 3 is an interesting chapter. It's about individual differences, and I think even though the first portion is long, that a lot of you can relate to what is being spoken about in this chapter. So the objectives for this whole entire chapter are first to identify individual differences and how they affect behavior in the workplace. We're also going to explain how emotions and mood relate to behavior, and list the most common workplace attitudes and why they matter for organizational behavior. So I think you probably maybe didn't think about how mood can truly be a science when it comes to the workplace. So the first thing we want to start with is that we really do appreciate individual differences, right? Working well with others depends on the ability to understand and explain why people behave as they do. So appreciation of your colleagues open doors to opportunity. And I feel that in my personal experience, 9 times out of 10, when people have a miscommunication at work, it's because they weren't necessarily listening to the individual differences. So I'm hoping that as we review this chapter, some of these things will resonate with you and allow you to work a little smoother in your office. So what are traits, personal traits and values? Some are common among all people. Each person we meet and work with is unique. So each person has different goals, different aspirations, different preferences, right? Even in our class, we can see some people, are going to go out and go into banking. Some people are going to go into hospitality. Some people maybe become a stay-at-home mom for a couple of years or a parent. Our aspirations, some people work in a family business. We all have preferences too. Maybe we want to work in the United States, maybe we want to work abroad, maybe we want to work in the office, maybe we want to work remotely. So lots of different options, as you can see. It's kind of infinite when we start to think about all the different people out there and all the different traits and values that they each have. When people come into a group or organization, they bring their whole selves with them. And this is more and more the case, for Gen Y, Gen Z. So they bring their family history, their personal values, their fears, aspiration, life experiences. In Europe and Asia, this is a little bit different. In Europe, I feel when I work there, we don't necessarily share a lot of this information, but it is there. In the United States, this is more and more the trend that people really share this information, and it is going to show up somehow, so they might as well start talking about it, in my opinion. So what are individual differences? They're the ways in which people are similar or dissimilar in their personal characteristics. So simple as that. The thing that we need to do, though, with those individual differences is understand them. So why do people act and behave as they do? You grew up in a family, so your parents had different personalities, your siblings have different personalities. So if we can adapt our behavior slightly to fit with our colleagues' needs, interests, and work styles, everything moves along a little bit smoother. As you can see that, as I said already, in your family. I think one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this is that I grew up in a family where my parents are very, very opposite. They have things in common, but they got divorced when I was 6, and I can see exactly why. They just kind of live their lives very differently. My dad is more structured. My mom is kind of fly by the seat of her pants. My dad is very outgoing. My mom is very much of an introvert. All these different things that, as I grew up and moving from household to household, I learned this skill very early in life to adapt to a fault, right? Because sometimes when you adapt too much, we can be people pleasers and things. But the idea is that if we can adapt a little bit to fit our behaviors, their colleagues' behaviors in the workplace, it can be a smoother career for all of us in the workplace. So here are the learning objectives for the first part of this chapter, 3.1, personality. We're going to identify individual differences, how they affect behavior in the workplace, because we can talk about differences all day long, but we're really focusing on what happens in the workplace in this course. Explain what personality is relative to nature and to nurture, look at the research, know what behavioral and social traits are and how they affect behavior, and describe cognitive and self-conception traits. So we can be a little bit more self-aware and how that can really get us forward and make our life a whole lot smoother. So personality is a combination of individual characteristics and traits, the way that we think, behave, experience emotions, and interact with others. Defining personality traits, those are enduring characteristics that describe a person's behavior. So if a friend is sensitive to the opinion of others, would you interact with that person differently than you would with another friend or family who likes to joke around, right? So if you haven't thought of this example already, you know that yes, you adapt your style depending on who it is that you're speaking with. And that goes also for if a person has a strong preference for order. As I said with my parents, my dad is very orderly. My mom, not so much. So I know that when I go to my dad's house with my 4-year-old, we need to make sure we don't bring food into the living room. We don't, we only play, in designated areas. His house is not baby proofed. So, but when I go to my mom's house, it's a lot more free and, she's just kind of more open to these ideas. Another preference, can we talk about process? My husband is very methodical. I'm a little bit more, let's cut to the chase. Certainty is another one, especially when we talk about cultures, people are more or less risk averse. So would you expect that preference to affect the way he works with others? Of course, right? And would that preference affect what he expects of others and how he evaluates the success of a project, right? So again, all these things go into how people look at work. Nature or nurture, I think this research here is super interesting, right? Are we the way because of heredity, because of our genetics, or because of our environment? And the textbook has a really interesting case, right, about twins that were separated at birth, and how on the end of the day, like they're so similar in many ways. So they do act in combination, these two things. Heredity sets the limits and likely nature of our personal growth, while environment, they say, enhances or hinders our development along the way. Our personality is stable. I've already mentioned in class that that the research shows that they are. That I too took a personality test when I was 12, and then I took it again like at 19, and it shifted. But now I'm back to where I was when I'm 12. So the research shows that actually our personalities don't really change all that much. And I also see this when I go to class reunions, especially from high school. People that I grew up with that I know since they were 5 years old and maybe haven't seen since they were 17. Now that when I see them in my 40s, the personality is like exactly the same. So, this research examines the stability of personality at different stages in life. If we observe a teenager who is outgoing, what we expect to see when that person is an adult. We notice that certain young children are more cooperative and agreeable, and we then predict how those children will behave as an adults. That's so interesting, right? Especially as I have a child. So curious. Rodney, he's pretty agreeable, but definitely agreeable at school and not necessarily always cooperative at home, which I think is normal. Stability, anyway, so we'll see how he turns out. Stability of personality, this goes further to say that yes, that's what research shows that they actually are formed at a very early age. So working with others, an important objective is to understand their individual differences and adapt our own behaviors constructively, right? We're not saying that you need to bend over backwards, but be constructive rather than trying to change their personalities, right? You're not going to get water out of a rock. That is what I try to think of this as, right? People don't change that much. So don't try to put in what was left out. Try to draw out, right, what was left in. And one of my friends will say that I often start a sentence with, Well, you're so good at this. So will you help me with it? And it's because I really try and look at my friends and identify who could be the best person to help me with something like this. Because I really, I don't want to draw water out of a rock. And what are behavioral and social traits? These reflect how a person appears when interacting with others in both social and professional settings. We can identify these traits by observing the way people act and interact with others. So when you see people socialize, which is why I make a point of being at as many social activities as I can, that's because I feel like I can pick up a lot of information very quickly about the people that I work with. When I see them engage with the dean or engage with colleagues, I can better understand my colleagues, and then I can communicate with them better when I have to speak to them one-on-one. So, people know that, people that are very energetic and outgoing, these activities are reflective of a behavioral and social trait, right, known as extroversion, which was one of the big 5 traits that we'll talk about in a few minutes. So there are numerous frameworks for categorizing personality traits, one of which we'll do is the MBTI, Myers-Briggs Personality Questionnaire. The one they talk about in the textbook is the Big 5, and I like the Big 5 too, but I don't feel like it's as detailed. And so that's why I like to do with you all the MBTI. But the Big 5 is very good too, and they talk about, as I said, extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, emotional stability, and openness to experience. And so we'll go through these, and the idea is that we all try and pick up a little bit of each of these traits, and that makes our experience in the workplace a whole lot smoother. So extroversion, right, is being comfortable with others and enjoying meeting a lot of people, rather than being alone, and avoiding these interactions, which is fine too. But a little bit of extroversion in the workplace is helpful in most roles, I should say. Also, you want to be a little bit agreeable, someone who's good natured, right, cooperative, trusting, conflict avoidant. If you know people who are conflict prone or not very cooperative, right, it's not very fun to work with them. So that's why we all want to have a little bit of agreeableness in us. We want to be conscientious, to be, understanding like what can be accomplished, be detail oriented, specific plans to make commitments. And so, right, if we often fail to complete things in a timely manner, again, not so easy to work with. Emotional stability, is someone who's relaxed and carefree. So you want to be calm, laid back, not stressing out. Again, we all know people who get anxious and often stressed out. Even my mom is somewhat relaxed in her home. She can very easily get anxious. And so sometimes she's hard to work with. And openness to experience. This is one of my favorites because I love it when people are curious, interested in new ideas, open to change. If we're if we have narrow-mindedness within us, little interest, then again, it's harder to work with someone like that. Oh, and the last one is a proactive personality. This one is, I think, the hardest sometimes, that I find that people are sometimes not, have this disposition to go out and, come up with some ideas to make things better. And that people are sometimes like focusing on their own tasks. Here at LMU, because we're growing so quickly, those people don't usually survive here for very long. That people who do well here are the ones who are willing to pick up new projects. And so what are self-concept traits? This is my maybe favorite part of this section, that individuals have themselves as physical, social, spiritual, moral beings. And these are traits related to, they help us with the critical differences, self-awareness and awareness of others, right? This has become more and more popular in the last decade or so. This is what I did my master's thesis on. How can we increase self-awareness in the workplace? Because when we have self-awareness of ourselves and of others, or awareness of ourselves and others, then everything seems to go a whole lot smoother. After working for 15 years in banking, I saw that my best managers, my best colleagues for those who are always scanning both themselves and the groups that they were in, to be aware of what was going on around them. So self-awareness means conscious and attentive to our own behaviors, preferences, styles, biases, personalities, and so on. So that's often why you're in graduate school, an opportunity to kind of take stock of what your preferences are. What type of style do you like? Do you like to kind of be late? Do you like to be on time? Do you think you have some biases? Do you like an orderly workplace? Are you okay with it being a little bit chaotic, like an ad agency can be very, very busy, and people thrive on that. Also, awareness of others, right, is being sensitive and mindful of these same things in others. So they provide a foundational basis for understanding human behavior. And for better or for worse, right, we all are going to be working with humans for the most part in the office. So self-esteem, a belief about one's own worth based on an overall self-evaluation. People high in self-esteem see themselves as capable, worthwhile, and acceptable individuals. They tend to have few doubts about themselves. It's fun to work with these people, but in low self-esteem, they're full of doubt and often afraid to act. That's why, as I raise my child, we talk a lot about how can we build his self-esteem, not just for my child, for any child these days. That's a key parenting skill, is how can I build their self-esteem? I play music over and over. He wants to hear the same song like 30 times. And they say that builds self-esteem because then they can start to predict what's coming next in the song. And I do it even though sometimes it drives me a little crazy. It definitely drives my husband crazy. But I try and all these different tips and tricks to make sure that he is feeling capable, and that he's feeling more accepted as an individual. Self-efficacy, this is a term that we don't hear as much. So this is a more specific version of self-esteem. It's a individual's confidence and belief about the likelihood of successfully completing a specific task. Again, this is really helped in childhood. So we try and help. I see this again, I help my son very much when I help him to complete a task, so he's confident about being able to complete a task. And I don't always jump in to fix it for him. I try and make it possible so that he can do it for himself. So if you have feelings of low efficacy about giving a presentation or speech, that can be a problem. They set higher goals, these people, and are more likely to persist on the task in the face of challenges and setbacks. I can see that my husband must have had a lot of great childhood encouragement, because he will always persist on so many different tasks. Here's the locus of control, and we're kind of almost done here with our slides. The extent to which a person feels able to control his or her life. And so people who believe events are controlled by the internal locus of control within themselves versus outside social or physical environment or luck have an external locus of control. About 10 more slides. And so here we have looking at an internal locus versus an external locus. Our job performance, internal, they praise or blame themselves, while an external locus, they might attribute performance to things outside of their control. Something with job satisfaction, they feel more satisfied with work and feel less alienated with their internal. But external, they feel less satisfied. They feel more satisfied and then less satisfied. So they're more likely to believe policies, procedures, things are unfair. I won't go through all of these, but the idea is that if there's an external locus of control, sometimes people feel victimized. And so an internal locus of control is kind of a better place to be, for lack of a better way to say it. So you feel kind of like you have control, and that's a good thing. If we feel like we can have control, which often we do, we always have choices, that's for sure. they often have more control than we think we do. So self-monitoring reflects a person's ability to adjust his or her behavior to external situation, environmental factors. As you saw, someone just came over. I'm in a lounge at the airport. Someone came over to pick up my glass and my dish. So as I was speaking to you, I was also kind of scanning her and what her needs were. So self-monitoring can be tricky at times. High self-monitors are sensitive to external cues and tend to adapt their behavior to the demands of a situation. They can present a very different appearance from their true self, right? So for better or for worse. So that's kind of a fine line, because we definitely want to show our true selves, but we also want to be respectful of other people's wants and needs. And so those self-monitors, what you see is what you get. My husband can self-monitor as he gets older, and comes out of, is moving into, his life after cancer. I have to say he's becoming less and less self-monitoring, kind of just happy to show the world who he is. I have respect for that in some ways, but he's at the end of his career too, right? He's not looking to move up the corporate ladder. We'll talk a little bit now about type A and type B personalities, which I think you're familiar with. Emotional adjustment traits, so how we handle distress or undesirable emotions. So type A, we get a little bit impatient. We have a desire for achievement and perfectionism. And type B are kind of more easygoing and less competitive in relation to daily events. I'd say that probably my students think I'm a little bit more type B, but my husband will definitely say 100% that I'm very type A, because he sees how I prepare a lot for the courses. He sees how I look after our son, and make sure that I read all the parenting books. I feel like as a parent, I've become a little bit more type A, and I've really had to kind of balance that, and really try and make sure that I'm not too I'm a perfectionist in many ways. But I definitely, because I'm in the workplace when I come to school, I really try and balance that quite a bit. Now the dark triad of personality, this is actually so interesting that it's even in this textbook, because it's information that has really only shown up in the last 2 or 3 years as a topic in organizational behavior. So these discussions of personality emphasize socially desirable traits such as extroversion and agreeableness, but psychologists have labeled some undesirable traits, and they call it the dark triad: Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. So these traits reflect hostility toward others and a general lack of empathy. And unfortunately, it's not unusual to see these traits revealed in relationships with others. And there's even been studies that CEOs and entrepreneurs will very often, like 90% of the time, have traits, especially psychopathy. So let's talk about these. So just so you're aware of them, if you encounter them in the workplace. So this is after Machiavelli. So someone who is cunning, guile, and deceitful. They have with a logic but cynical perspective, and are willing to lie or cheat to achieve personal goals. And they rarely are swayed by loyalty, friendship, past promises, or the opinion of others, and are skilled at influencing people. So this is why they say that it can happen in the workplace, and that people can climb the corporate ladder and still have one of these dark triad personality traits, because they are also skilled at being convincing. So that's one. I'd say the next two, in my experience, are more popular in the workplace. That narcissism, someone who's self-absorbed, entitled, a little bit hostile. They exhibit it, because they're after the Greek mythological idea. The narcissist, he looks into the water, and all he sees is himself. So they have a high level of self-love, believing that they're uniquely special and entitled to praise and admiration. my husband worked in the film industry, and he says it's actually most celebrities have to exhibit a little bit of narcissism because their whole life they have all this attention towards them, and they have to get used to that. Not that I was ever really famous, but there were a couple of years when I was doing yoga production, DVD production, and I had a lot of attention on me, a lot of cameras, and I was on television. And I actually didn't like it that much. I didn't feel very comfortable in that role. So I felt like I kind of naturally gravitated to move out of that role. And so I can see how people who are okay with that they can move forward with that type of idea. So but at the same time, they're sometimes insensitive, hostile, self-enhancing, and interpret information with a self-serving bias. So, there's two sides to the coin in this. As you can see, right, on People magazine, we're always hearing stories about celebrities who are not really nice people at the end of the day. And then psychopathy. This is one that I hear. I did a study this summer about entrepreneurs, or read a study, I should say, and how they sometimes can show low levels of empathy and high levels of impulsivity and thrill seeking. So entrepreneurship is definitely thrilling, and it's often associated with sociopathy, which is negatively correlated with agreeableness and conscientiousness. So we want to be agreeable, we want to be conscientious, but it's not necessarily always possible when we have this type of dark triad. And psychopaths tend to be egotistical, lack empathy, and rarely show remorse or regret. If you Google Trump and psychopathy or narcissism, there are lots of articles that have been written about that. But whether you like him or not, you have to admit that he has become very successful in what he's been doing. And so we have just 3 more slides: authoritarianism and dogmatism. Authoritarianism is a tendency to adhere rigidly to conventional values and to obey recognized authority. So like really holding on to this idea. In Asia, there's a tendency to do this, and it's not really looked down upon. And dogmatism leads a person to see the world as a threatening place and to regard authority as absolute. So they are really looking for only authority to tell them what to do. And that can be a problem as well. So how can we assess personality? How can we have insight about personality in the workplace and maybe assess a potential employee? Assessments about people who get hired, you often maybe have to take a test like this or give a test. And these personality assessments will provide information about the uniqueness and consistency of individual traits. And so projective tests are designed to elicit one's motivational needs, drives, preferences, and especially those out of one's immediate consciousness. The thematic perception test presents takers for these ink blots and no obvious result, but they're just looking to see how you react to something, and in order to see how you'd react to something happening in the workplace, a sales call, confusion, chaos, etc. What type of personality do you have? I've had to take this actually only once in the, 10 interviews, 15 interviews that I've had in my lifetime. And it was pretty accurate, I'm not gonna lie to you. This is one of the tests, the Rorsch test. So you describe what they see, but this actually isn't given all that often because it's kind of hard to decipher or diagnose, but we wanted you to be aware of it. They're more like normative tests that rely on objective and standardized interpretation of responses. It's more straightforward survey questions and how you have, if you have a specific group of interests. So true, false, multiple choice provides the most reliable assessment. Like succeeding is the ability to get what you want, most or least. How do you kind of come on, maybe there'd be a Likert scale. There's a caliber profile, which is very popular as well. And it's a 99 item assessment measuring 22 behavioral traits, including communication, interpersonal and decision-making preferences. So again, we'll get a taste of this in our self-assessments. But if you're looking for someone to be in a sales position, you definitely want someone who's more sociable. You don't necessarily want someone who's ego-driven. So it can identify different things that might be, and then the test itself, because the company pays for this, they get the results and they have profiles of, who would be a good salesperson, who would be a good project manager, who would be a good analyst. And then they match up the candidates with those profiles. And so that's it. Thank you for joining me for the first part of chapter 3. I hope that was interesting. I look forward to discussing it all with you in class.